Welcome to The Connector, where we connect North Carolina to ideas and North Carolinians to each other. This podcast series is from the Institute for Emerging Issues at North Carolina State University. And now to the conversation.
Hello and welcome to the Connector podcast. I'm Sarah Hall, Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues at North Carolina State University, a public policy think tank that brings together leaders from regions, sectors, and perspectives to tackle critical issues facing North Carolina's economic competitiveness. It's college basketball season in North Carolina, and while we may not all agree on which team should take home the national championship, we can all agree that March Madness is terrible for workforce productivity. New data isn't out for this year, but a study from 2024 revealed employers expected to see over $17 billion in lost productivity from the NCAA men's basketball tournament alone. And here with me today to talk about our workforce is Ron Painter, principal of Forbes Fields Associates. Ron, you have over 30 years of experience in workforce development at the national, state, and local levels. Give us a brief history of your leadership roles and why you named your company after a baseball field in Pittsburgh. Tell us the story behind that.
Sarah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and also a shout out to your leadership and cooperation on this project that we're going to talk about today, the Workforce Leadership Institute. 30 years. You would think that I would know a lot more than I do after 30 years in this business. I started in a rural 3-county project here in Western Pennsylvania. I'm located just about 20 miles north of Pittsburgh, and from there then went on to be on loan to the U.S. Department of Labor for a project called the Enterprise Project. We were looking at how you could take principles of quality management and did those apply to projects and programs under workforce development. And then came to the city of Pittsburgh to work for the mayor, Mayor Tom Murphy, managing their what was then JTPA programs. And I spent time there, about a decade there, creating the first joint board between the city and the county, the Workforce Development Board. At that point, it was called Three Rivers, later changing its name to Partner for Work. And then I came to DC to work to head up the National Association of Workforce Boards, and left there in June of 2023. So since then, I've been doing technical assistance for the Department of Labor and doing some projects with local workforce boards and doing work with the directors in North Carolina and with you at North Carolina State University and the IEI. Forbes Field, obviously here in Pittsburgh, iconic baseball field. It's where the Pirates played for a long time. It was located in Oakland. Now on the site of the, I guess it's called now Posvar. When I went to grad school at Pitt, it was called the Quad. But across the street is still the outfield wall, over which Bill Mazeroski hit a home run to win the 1960 World Series. So I was in DC, a friend of mine by the name of Ken Wojtek. Ken Wojtek and I were talking about what we might do at some time, after we left DC. Both of us big baseball fans. And we thought if we ever did something, we should name it after something to do with baseball. Stunned to find out that in Pennsylvania, the corporate name Forbes Field Associates was not taken. So registered and have been operating under that name for a while.
So Ron, we first met in 2022 when you were the executive director of the National Association of Workforce Development Boards. NC State had just launched a pilot workforce leadership program with a cohort of 5 regional teams from across the state. You were part of an advisory committee that came down to Raleigh to just about every meeting that we had hosted. That was in partnership with our NC Works Commission, our state Department of Commerce, the NC Association of Workforce Boards, our partners here in economic development at NC State, Continuing and Lifelong Learning, Golden Leaf, and many others. So my question for you is, why is bolstering today's workforce leaders and building the leaders of tomorrow so important? And what competencies do you think are most important for those workforce leaders?
Oh, wow. Great question. And I think to start, I think many of us got into this business and what we learned early on to do was how to run a program using federal and sometimes state and philanthropic funds to skill a workforce. And then as we grew, we started to understand that there were a lot of other factors, that workforce development was basically a system, an ecosystem in a region, but that ecosystem was made up of other systems. So systems like education, like economic development, like government, like critical industries and what happens to critical industries in your region. Things that you're experiencing in North Carolina when new companies or new industries are growing. At the time that I was in Pittsburgh, biotech was starting to emerge and technology was starting to emerge in Pittsburgh. Many people remember Pittsburgh as the Steel City, but it became a city of meds and eds. At that time, I think like over 100,000 students called Pittsburgh home. So education became an important industry. Tech became an important industry. Finance became, emerged as an important industry. PNC is headquartered in Pittsburgh, and I think now the fifth or sixth largest bank in the country. So we started to realize that we started to get, when I was at Three Rivers, very much into data and the use of data. And that started to get us involved in issues like mapping. Where was the labor force? What did we understand about commute patterns? That started to get us involved in issues around transportation and started to get us thinking about what was going on in different neighborhoods and housing and how all of this started to fit together. So I think I wasn't the only one. I think lots of us in workforce development, when I would say under what was then the Workforce Investment Act and now the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, started to learn and realize that there were a host of factors that impacted how somebody got skilled. And so I think naturally became how do we understand these other systems? How do we collaborate with these other systems? And so I think the role of a leader in workforce development today is very, very different from when I came on. I came to Pittsburgh as the steel industry was, I guess you'd say, collapsing. There were, if you stood in the south side of Pittsburgh, the next 20 miles were virtually continuous steel mills. Today, that's home to tissue engineering. It is home to tech companies. It is home to a number of other industries, tech related, med related. So why now? I think we're watching a host of factors that we are now very much aware of, and that has to do with the speed of change. As businesses change product and services, and they change processes that they're using, they change the nature of the equipment they're using. They're using robots. AI is becoming a major factor in all industries. I think what we're needing is that, the old saying, it takes a village. It takes all of these systems working together. No one system can solve or maintain a region's skill level around their labor force. So it's getting these systems to figure out how to work together. I happen to believe workforce boards can be the hub of that, because their responsibilities under WIOA are to convene education, is to engage business, is to look at where our economic development, money's being invested. So I think now we're being asked to do things that, when I started, we didn't even understand. We didn't have that much data that we were working with. Now we're inundated with data. So I think when we talk about what kind of skills, you've been a part of that conversation. NC State has been, we've been reaching out to a whole host of people saying, what do you think a director needs to do today? That director needs to be able to analyze data, because there is so much coming at us. There's so much we understand about a labor force today and the region. A lot we don't, but we're learning more, and we're learning more by data. So I think understanding data becomes really important. I think we're questioning investments being made in post-secondary education to a higher degree than we ever have before. I grew up, probably you as well, with this assumption that you were just going to go to college and then you would be fine. Well, now we're questioning that, and we're seeing the rise of work-based learning in apprenticeship and on the job training as important. And we're seeing companies look at skills versus what school you went to all the time. So I think being able to understand that data, being able to tell the story of what's the return on investment, both to the job seeker and to the employer, about skill development, what makes sense in terms of skill development. I think the other thing is that we are watching as the boomers, as I walk out, my generation walks out of the labor force, there is a dearth, literally, of bodies coming into that labor force. So I think understanding the utilization of labor, how do you best use that labor force that's in your region? And of course, then that starts to take in issues like, well, where do they live? How do they get to and from work? What happens around childcare? How do we deal with childcare? What are the health issues? We're reading a lot about, we're doing Zoom. A lot of people work remotely, but we're learning that there are attendant health issues, mental health issues with working remotely in isolation. So I think that that becomes what's necessary. So I think regional leadership becomes even more critical than it's been. It's always been important. Place has always mattered. We know that for a long time. But I think aligning the resources necessary to skill the workforce and maintain a skilled workforce, I think that's where leaders across the region need to understand each other's systems. What do we expect out of economic development? What do we expect out of workforce development? What are we expecting out of education? And so I think the collaboration among leaders, their ability to understand and appreciate, not in detail the other systems, but to be able to appreciate what are those connecting points, I think is even more critical today than it's ever been.
And Ron, actually, to that point, I have a follow-up question. Who makes up the majority of our local workforce boards?
By law, both the state and local boards must have a 51% majority from the private sector. So The majority of the boards are made up of private sector individuals, and the law says who have optimum policy authority in their organization.
Okay, so that gets us all of those systems working together.
What it's really meant to, I believe, having been part of the process to negotiate WIOA, it's really been to focus on that demand side. What is happening to work itself? What is happening to these major industries that are in our region? So it's trying to get it's trying to make sure that when we're developing skill development programs or we're sending people to skill development, that there's actually demand for that skill in the region, or the individual has identified demand in some place they're moving to.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So demand and accountability of those investments.
Yeah, and I think going back to like, what about leadership now? I mean, I think we're watching business obviously change quickly. The kinds of skills that, or the types of skills that many businesses need today are very different. For the worker, I think part of the role of the board, the executive director or CEO for the board, is so that certificate, that credential that the worker is earning, is there portability to that? Is there a general industry recognition that this skill is important in the industry? And so I think that certainly means that the conversations between education and workforce boards needs to be tight.
And Ron, that is a great segue to my next question, which is this partnership that we have with our Strategic Workforce Leadership Initiative, which we're going to be hosting here at NC State at the Institute for Emerging Issues, April 29th through May 2nd. What sessions will be covered, and what do you think participants will gain from these sessions?
Thanks, Sarah. I'm pretty excited about what's coming up, and as I share with other people, there's building excitement. What we want to do is we want to talk. So participants are going to learn a little bit about the philosophy and the history of at least the federal investment in workforce development, because I think it's important to understand a little bit about where we've come from in the industry. We're going to be looking at how economists look at talent development and workforce utilization, so that people are going to get a flavor for, okay, so what is outside? What does that look like? We're going to talk about things like data analytics, like what are common data sets that are out there, and how do they impact decision making. So Lightcast, which is world famous for data analytics, is going to be joining us for that session. A friend and a great mind in post-secondary education, Dr. Sherry Utash from WSU Tech, which is affiliated with Wichita State. Sherry's going to talk about the systems in education through which we create skill. How does that work? We're going to be looking with Charlie Terrell from Accenture. We're going to be looking at what kind of challenges are out there as we look not only at the US, but we look globally around what workforce challenges are ahead. We're going to be doing a session. I recently finished a course in strategic forecasting at the University of Houston. So we're going to be looking at how do we think about issues and trends? How do we recognize issues and trends that are happening out there? And then are there ways for us to connect that to workforce development? What will workforce development, or what will skill development look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And then obviously we're going to do a session with the participants themselves as they've heard about the history and economics, and they're looking at how do you actually make public policy? So John Stanford from the Prison Group is going to be talking about what's the process of public policy. How does it arrive at the agenda? How do you have impact on what direction state and federal legislatures take around workforce development? So once they do all that, then comes that session. I think you're going to participate, and Stephanie Dees is going to participate, and others around, okay, what did we learn? What do we feel we don't know enough about? And what was new skills? So, and part of it, I think the philosophy, and obviously because you've been a part of this process, you can correct me, but it's trying to level set. What is workforce development? What is that system? And then how are these other components critical to it? And how, as a leader, again, do you need to understand a little bit about, Sherry's going to talk about what are the expectations? What are the measures of success for education? So I think we're going to be talking a lot about those measures of success as we go along, recognizing in some cases, the constraints that state and federal legislatures put on funding.
Yes, and I think participants are going to leave this session with a lot more resources, a lot more connections. They're going to have the ability to navigate in more uncertainty, that adaptive sort of skill that really anyone in the workforce needs, but especially those who are workforce leaders. And I think we talked about anyone who's going to be a workforce leader. So if you're going to be an executive director of a workforce board, if you're going to serve on a workforce board, if you're going to work in higher ed or operate one of those programs, this is a session you should want to participate in. Is there anyone else that I missed who you think should participate?
No, I think people that, even from the private sector, they're working in HR for their company, or they're involved in training employees in their company. I think too often what we've seen in the past is finger pointing versus this idea of collaboration. So I think even people in the private sector can benefit from understanding what is that public process, what's that perception around what workforce development is, and what are the marks for workforce development success.
So final question before we close. What is the next big issue in workforce development that you think leaders will want to come together to explore?
Oh, wow. I don't know. Part of me thinks that organizational agility is going to be important. I think if systems are going to move from more partnership and collaboration with business and job seekers, I think they need to move away from reacting to anticipating. So how do you move from, and I think this is something that, maybe the IEI takes on, or other organizations like yours, because I think legislators need to understand as well, what is agility? What is organizational agility? How do you maintain both accountability, but the ability of economic development, workforce development, and education to respond to these rapid changes that are going on, and these new demands? So I think that's part of it. I think is understanding how I lead an organization, and how I lead this collaborative effort among these systems. I think that's really going to be a skill, a critical skill coming forward. And for a lot of us, that's a huge challenge. We got some money once upon a time to run a program, and so that's what we did. But now we're being called on for a different role, a role of outreach and understanding and collaboration. And we really have to learn how to organize and trust the people in our organization, just as business is experiencing that today. The CEO can't know everything that's happening on the floor, or in a service office. So I think those are the things that that face us.
And Ron, I can certainly share that one of the first parts of that is to come together and share these stories. What are we learning? What's going well? What's working? What's not working? I do think that's something that the Institute for Emerging Issues does really well. And hopefully we'll have some of those conversations at the Strategic Workforce Leadership Initiative.
Yeah, and I think we saw in that first session, I think we saw people from different pieces of the system, that moment of recognition that, oh, I didn't know that that's your measures of success that you have to report to your funder. In some cases, it doesn't make sense for what the region needs to do. So I think it does help develop a sharper advocacy agenda around what we need funding for and what that funding needs to do. So I'm optimistic in that sense. And I agree that happens when you get people in the room and they allow themselves to interact.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks so much, Ron, for sharing more about enhancing the workforce development profession. And I look forward to seeing you in person in a few weeks. To learn more about the Strategic Workforce Leadership Initiative, you can visit go.ncsu.edu/workforceleader or visit emergingissues.org. Until next time, let's stay connected.
This has been a presentation from the Institute for Emerging Issues at North Carolina State University. To learn more, please visit us at emergingissues.org.